Clara Whitmore stood at the edge of the stage, her sharp eyes scanning the audience below. The conference hall buzzed with energy. Executives, tech innovators, and industry leaders from across the country were gathered to discuss the future of AI. Clara had been invited to give the keynote speech, an honor she'd worked hard for, but today, she couldn't quite shake the feeling that something was missing. At 45, Clara had built a career most could only dream of. She was the CEO of one of the most successful tech companies in the world, a self-made woman who had navigated the labyrinth of corporate politics with grace and tenacity. She had everything she could possibly want: success, wealth, and respect in the industry. Yet, in the quiet moments when the applause faded and the business deals were signed, there was a loneliness she couldn't ignore. She smiled and waved at the audience, maintaining the poised exterior she had perfected over the years, but inside, she was wrestling with a flood of emotions she had long buried. The buzz in the air intensified as the session after hers began, and Clara decided to slip out before the crowd became too overwhelming. She needed a moment to collect her thoughts. As she made her way through the lobby, a voice froze her in her tracks. Clara. It was a name she hadn't heard in over a decade, and yet, it seemed to echo in her mind as if it had never left. She turned around slowly, her heart pounding against her chest. Standing in the doorway, framed by the soft light streaming through the tall glass windows, was Julian Reynolds. For a moment, Clara didn't know whether to run or to stand still. The man who had once meant everything to her, the man who had broken her heart, was standing right in front of her. His presence was both a shock and a pull, a magnet she couldn't resist. He looked the same in a way, older of course, with a few more lines around his eyes, but his jaw was still strong, his hair dark and slightly graying at the temples. His gaze met hers, and for a second, the years between them seemed to melt away. Julian. Her voice was barely a whisper, as if speaking his name would somehow bring back all the years of pain she had fought so hard to forget. He smiled, though it was tinged with something softer, more apologetic than she remembered. I didn't think I'd ever see you again. Clara felt her chest tighten. She had been avoiding this. She had built a life in which Julian was a ghost, an unspoken memory she buried deep inside her. Seeing him now, after all these years, was a shock to the system. You look good, she managed, though the words felt hollow in her mouth. She could hear the catch in her voice and immediately cursed herself for it. Julian chuckled softly, as if he understood the tension between them. It's been a long time. Clara nodded, not trusting herself to speak further. Instead, she turned her attention to the sleek glass doors leading outside, needing a breath of fresh air. Julian followed her silently, the space between them thick with the unsaid. Once outside, Clara leaned against the cool stone of the building, the city skyline sprawling before her. She could hear the hum of the street below, but it felt like a distant noise. Everything inside her was focused on the man standing beside her, the man who had once been her everything. How have you been?" she asked, trying to make her voice sound casual, but failing miserably. The years between them felt as if they hadn't passed at all. Julian paused, searching for the right words. I've been okay. It's a long story, but mostly, I've been busy with work. You know how it is. Clara looked at him, her expression unreadable. And, how's your family? He hesitated, his eyes flicking downward. They're fine. Clara nodded, her heart heavy with unasked questions. He had never been good at talking about personal matters, but his answer felt like an admission of something more, something he wasn't ready to share. For a few moments, there was an awkward silence. Clara could feel her pulse racing, a mixture of anxiety and something else, something familiar, that stirred within her. I didn't expect to see you here, she finally said, breaking the silence. You're still in tech? Julian smiled, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. Still in tech. I'm actually here for the same reason you are. A few meetings, some networking. It's funny, isn't it? How the world works. Clara felt her stomach twist. You haven't changed. He raised an eyebrow. And you have? Still the same sharp-witted, business-focused Clara. Her mouth tightened. I suppose so. I didn't have time to change. Julian studied her, his gaze thoughtful. It's been years, Clara. Surely, there's room for change. Maybe I could help you find that again. She frowned, his words unexpectedly hitting deeper than she wanted them to. Was this just a casual meeting between two former lovers, Or was there something more to this encounter? The truth was, Clara hadn't realized how much she'd buried until now. How much of her heart was still stuck in that painful chapter of her life, the one that had ended so abruptly, so painfully. Her voice was soft but firm when she spoke. "I don't think we should revisit the past, Julian." His eyes flashed with a mix of regret and understanding, but before he could respond, she took a step back. "I need to go," Clara said, her heart racing in her chest. "It was good to see you." Julian didn't move to stop her. He simply nodded, his expression pained but accepting. "Take care, Clara." With one last glance at the man who had once been her future, Clara turned and walked away, the weight of the past heavy on her shoulders. As she left the conference hall, a storm raged inside her, one she wasn't sure she was ready to face. Clara sat at her desk late that evening, staring at the glowing screen of her laptop. The world outside her office windows was dark and still, but her mind was far from quiet. Her thoughts were filled with flashes of the past, of the days when life had seemed simpler, when love had been enough to sustain her through any challenge. She couldn't focus on work. Not tonight. Not after seeing Julian again. Clara had always been a woman of action. When something needed to be done, she did it. She didn't let emotion get in the way of her decisions. But that evening, as she sat in the silence of her high-rise office, it was clear that emotion was getting the better of her. And no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't stop the memories from flooding in. The first time she met Julian had been at a university conference, a nerdy, tech-focused event that neither of them was particularly excited about attending. Clara had been a promising PhD student, fresh from a small town, trying to find her place in the world of innovation. Julian had been the golden boy, a rising star in the tech world, his charm and intelligence already well known. They were introduced by a mutual friend, and it had taken only moments for Clara to notice him. It wasn't just his good looks or his easy confidence that drew her in. It was the way he listened to her, the way he seemed genuinely interested in her ideas, her passion for the future of technology. It was rare for anyone to take her seriously back then, but Julian did. They had talked late into the night, over dinner and drinks, about their dreams, their ambitions, and the lives they wanted to build. They shared stories of growing up, hers in a modest home, his in a wealthy suburb. But despite the differences in their backgrounds, they both shared a hunger for something more. They wanted to change the world. The months that followed had been a whirlwind. They worked together on several tech projects, their professional lives intertwined in a way that naturally spilled over into their personal one. Late nights at the office turned into early mornings spent together, brainstorming, creating, building something they both believed could change the future of the industry. Clara had never expected to fall in love. She had always been focused on her career, her studies, but Julian had a way of making her forget all the walls she had carefully built around herself. He was kind, thoughtful, and at first, completely devoted to her. They fit together like two pieces of a puzzle, complementing each other in ways that seemed almost too good to be true. But as the months passed, something began to shift. It wasn't anything obvious at first, but Clara noticed it. Julian's career started to take off. He was getting offers from major companies, being flown around the world to speak at conferences and pitch his ideas. It was the kind of success that Clara had always dreamed of, and she was happy for him, proud of him, even. But as his world expanded, hers seemed to shrink. She was still working long hours at the university, trying to balance her academic pursuits with her growing feelings for him. And as she grew more invested in their relationship, she couldn't ignore the subtle changes in Julian. The late nights became less frequent, and when they were together, his mind seemed elsewhere. He was distracted, always looking for the next big opportunity. She had tried to ignore it at first. The small comments, the excuses about meetings, and the "I'm too busy" messages. But one day, after a particularly lonely weekend, Clara had confronted him. "Julian, what's happening? I feel like I'm losing you." It was the first time she had truly said it out loud. And the look on his face, guilt mixed with something else, something she couldn't quite place, had shattered her. "I'm sorry, Clara. I've been offered a position in Silicon Valley. This is a huge opportunity for me, and I have to take it." Clara's heart had dropped into her stomach. The words had stung, but it wasn't just the job offer that hurt, it was the realization that he had already made his decision. She was no longer part of his future. "You didn't even ask me," Clara had whispered, feeling like the air had been sucked from her lungs. "I didn't think I needed to," Julian had replied. His voice was soft, almost apologetic, but there was no mistaking the finality in his words. "You knew how important this was to me." The rest of their conversation was a blur, filled with half-hearted apologies and explanations that didn't change the truth. Julian had chosen his career over their relationship. And Clara, devastated, had let him go. She couldn't hold him back, not when his ambition was so much bigger than the small life they had tried to build together. For months, Clara had numbed herself to the pain, throwing herself into her work. She focused on her career, her research, the projects that could make her successful in ways Julian's success could never touch. But deep down, she had never truly healed. The scar of losing him, the way he had slipped away without warning, without looking back, had remained, hidden under layers of accomplishments and distractions. Now, years later, with Julian standing in front of her again, that old wound had reopened. The memories, the hurt, the question of what could have been, all surged back to the surface. Clara's thoughts were interrupted by the soft buzz of her phone. She glanced at the screen. It was a message from her assistant, confirming a meeting tomorrow morning. She sighed and closed her laptop, trying to push the past back into the corners of her mind where it belonged. But Julian's face, his voice, the way he had looked at her earlier, it was all she could think about. Had he truly changed? Or was he still the same ambitious, driven man who had walked away when things got hard? She didn't have the answers yet. But Clara knew one thing for certain: seeing Julian again had set something in motion, something she couldn't ignore. The following days were a blur of meetings, conference panels, and late-night emails. Clara threw herself into her work with the same fervor she had used to bury her feelings for Julian all those years ago. But every time she closed her eyes, she saw his face, the same face she had tried so hard to forget, now so vividly etched in her memory. She couldn't shake the feeling that the past had a way of catching up with you when you least expected it. It had been 3 days since their encounter at the conference. And while Clara had tried to keep her distance, Julian had reached out. Twice. The first message had been brief, an apology for the awkwardness of their meeting. The second, longer one, was more personal. "Clara, I know it's been years. But I'd like to talk. I think we both deserve to understand what happened between us. I understand if you don't feel the same, but I would really appreciate it if we could meet for coffee or dinner, just to catch up. No expectations. Just 2 people trying to make sense of the past." The sincerity in his words caught Clara off guard. She had expected him to be more distant, more guarded. After all, he was Julian Reynolds, charismatic, successful, always the one in control. But this message was different. It was raw, vulnerable. She had stared at her phone for a long time before replying, hesitant to reopen the door she had closed so many years ago. "All right. Coffee tomorrow at noon?" And now, here she was, sitting at a small cafe just a few blocks from her office, waiting for Julian to arrive. Her fingers drummed nervously on the table, betraying her calm exterior. She had told herself that she was prepared for this meeting, that it was just a conversation between 2 former lovers with too much history to leave unspoken. But deep down, she knew this was more than that. The old wounds had never truly healed, and she wasn't sure if they ever would. The door to the cafe swung open, and Clara looked up. Julian stood there for a moment, scanning the room. When their eyes met, the briefest flicker of recognition passed between them. It was strange, seeing him again, after all these years, felt almost surreal. He was older now, more refined, but still that same person she had once fallen in love with. He smiled, the corners of his eyes crinkling with a warmth she hadn't expected. "Clara," he said softly, his voice carrying a tenderness that made her heart skip. "Julian," she replied, standing up to greet him. They exchanged a brief hug, awkward at first, but it softened as Clara felt the familiar pulse of affection she had tried to suppress for so long. She led him to the small corner booth where she had been waiting, the quiet hum of the cafe offering a neutral space for their conversation. "Thank you for agreeing to meet," Julian said as they sat down, his hands resting on the table, fidgeting slightly. "I know this isn't easy, but I really wanted to talk." Clara nodded, her fingers tracing the rim of her coffee cup. "It's been a long time, Julian. But I'm here. Let's talk." There was a brief silence between them, as if both of them were searching for the right words to begin. Julian spoke first. "I never should have walked away like I did. You didn't deserve that. I was young, ambitious, and stupid. But that's not an excuse. The truth is, I didn't know how to balance the two worlds, my career and us. And in the end, I chose my career. I thought I could have both, but I was wrong. I hurt you and I'm sorry. Clara swallowed hard, the words hitting her like a wave. She had heard apologies before, but this one felt different. There was no defense, no justification, just regret. I know you were busy, she replied quietly. I saw how hard you worked, how important your career was. I understood that. But I was there too, Julian. I was there when you needed someone to lean on. And when it got too much, you just walked away. She paused, her eyes fixed on her coffee, unwilling to meet his gaze for fear of betraying the emotions she had long kept locked inside. You left me alone, Julian. And I've never quite forgiven you for that. His expression softened, his eyes filled with guilt. I'm sorry for making you feel that way. I never wanted to hurt you. But I did. And I've lived with that every day since. It's been a long time, but I've thought about you, Clara. A lot. And I think I've spent all these years trying to understand what happened. Clara lifted her gaze, meeting his eyes for the first time since he had sat down. There was something vulnerable in his look, a sincerity that she hadn't expected. For a moment, she almost wanted to believe him. You hurt me, Julian, she said softly, but with a steadiness she hadn't felt in years. You didn't just walk away from me. You walked away from everything we could have been. From everything we dreamed of together. I was left wondering if it had all been a lie. Julian's lips parted as if to respond, but no words came out. He simply nodded, as if he understood the weight of her words. They sat in silence for a while, the air between them heavy with everything they hadn't said. I spent so many years trying to fill the hole you left in my life, Clara continued, her voice low. I focused on my career, on building something for myself. And in many ways, I succeeded. But there was always a part of me that wondered what would have happened if we had stayed together. If you had chosen us. She could feel the vulnerability in her words, the raw truth that she had buried for so long. But now that it was out in the open, it felt almost freeing. She could finally say the things she had never had the courage to say when she was younger. Julian leaned back in his chair, his hands folded in front of him, as if taking everything in. I don't have an answer for you, Clara. I can't change the past. But I'd like to make it right, if you'll let me. I don't expect you to forgive me immediately. I don't expect things to just pick up where we left off. But I'd like the chance to try, to rebuild what we had if you're willing. Clara looked at him, her heart thudding in her chest. She had told herself she wasn't ready for this, that she wasn't ready to open up to him again. But looking into his eyes, she realized she was tired of running from the past. Perhaps, just perhaps, there was a chance for them to build something new. Not the same as before, but something different. Something real. She sighed, a mix of relief and apprehension washing over her. I'm not sure if I'm ready, Julian. But I'm willing to try. It had been 2 weeks since that fateful meeting at the cafe. 2 weeks since Clara had decided to take a chance, however tentative, on Julian. And yet, despite her decision to reconnect, her heart remained in turmoil. The days following their conversation had been filled with small steps. Text messages exchanged, phone calls that lasted longer than either of them had expected. Julian was making an effort, that much was clear. But so was Clara. She couldn't afford to let her guard down completely, not yet. She wasn't sure she could ever do that again. Not after everything. Clara had always prided herself on being in control. She'd built her career from the ground up, making calculated decisions and avoiding emotional entanglements. But as Julian reappeared in her life, she found herself questioning everything she thought she knew about love and trust. Each time they met, something shifted between them. The easy conversations, the shared laughter, they all brought her closer to the truth she had tried so hard to bury. That she still cared for him. That maybe, just maybe, there was something worth salvaging between them. But each time the thought crept into her mind, the fear followed. It was a Friday evening when Clara's phone buzzed with a message from Julian. Dinner tomorrow? No work talk. Just us. I promise. The words seemed so simple, yet they carried with them a weight that Clara couldn't ignore. Dinner. Just the two of them. She hadn't allowed herself to entertain the idea of being alone with him outside of work-related matters. The thought of it made her stomach flutter with a mix of excitement and dread. She stared at the screen for a long moment, her thumb hovering over the keyboard. Should I say yes? Her mind raced. Could she truly do this? Could she open herself up to him again after all this time? After everything? She'd been so careful to keep her emotions locked away, to protect herself from the possibility of being hurt again. But the truth was, she had already let him in, even if she hadn't fully acknowledged it. Every time they spoke, every time she looked into his eyes, she felt that old connection stir, like a dormant flame being reignited. With a deep breath, she typed her response. I'll meet you tomorrow. But no funny business, Julian. A few moments later, his reply came, and she could almost hear his laughter through the words. You have my word. No funny business. The next evening, Clara arrived at the restaurant, a trendy yet intimate place that had been getting rave reviews for its innovative cuisine. Julian was already there, seated at a small table by the window, a bottle of wine between them. He stood as she approached, his smile warm, his eyes lighting up when he saw her. Clara, you look stunning, he said, his voice sincere. Thank you, she replied, offering a small smile. She hadn't dressed up for him. It was just a dinner, after all. But as she looked at him, something stirred within her. He wasn't the young, eager man she had once known. He was older, more mature, but there was still that same magnetic presence that made her heart skip. They sat down, and Julian poured her a glass of wine. They exchanged pleasantries at first, talking about work, about life, about the things they'd missed in the years apart. But as the evening wore on, the conversation naturally drifted toward more personal matters. Clara found herself telling him things she hadn't planned to. She spoke about her struggles as a CEO, the loneliness that came with her success, the emotional distance she had kept from others for fear of getting hurt. Julian listened intently, nodding in understanding, never interrupting. His silence was comforting, as if he was allowing her to speak freely, without judgment. When it was his turn, Julian shared his own story, his rise in the tech world, his decisions to chase after opportunities at the cost of his personal life. But there was something different in his tone now. He spoke with a vulnerability that Clara hadn't expected. There was no bravado, no sense of superiority. Just a man who had made mistakes and was trying to make amends. I didn't realize how much I'd lost, Julian said quietly, looking at her with a mixture of regret and longing. Not just you, Clara, but everything. I thought the success would fill the void. But it never did. It's like I kept running, hoping that if I ran fast enough, I could outrun the things that mattered most. And now here I am, trying to find a way back. Clara's heart ached at his words. She could hear the sincerity in his voice, see the pain in his eyes. He wasn't the same man who had walked away from her all those years ago. This was someone who had grown, who had learned, who had finally realized what he had lost. But the question remained, could she trust him again? She looked at him, her gaze steady. Do you think you can just come back into my life, Julian? After everything? Do you really think it's that easy? He took a deep breath, as if gathering his thoughts. No, I don't think it's easy. And I don't expect you to forgive me overnight. But I'm not asking for that. I'm asking for a chance. A chance to prove that I've changed. A chance to show you that I'm not the same man I was back then. Clara felt the weight of his words sink into her chest. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to trust him. But the wounds were still there, buried beneath the surface, and no matter how much time passed, they wouldn't heal overnight. Later that night, as they walked out of the restaurant together, Clara's mind was a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. Julian had made his case, and in many ways, it had been persuasive. He had shown her a side of himself that was raw and vulnerable, a side she hadn't known existed. But could she take the leap? Could she trust him with her heart again? Clara, Julian said, breaking her train of thought. I know this is hard for you. I don't expect things to be easy. But if you're willing to give me a chance, I'll spend every day trying to prove to you that I'm worth it. She stopped walking, turning to face him. You're asking for a second chance, she said, her voice low, filled with both longing and fear. And I'm scared, Julian. I'm scared that I'll end up getting hurt again. Julian reached out, taking her hand in his touch gentle but firm. I can't promise you that it won't be hard. But I can promise you this, I'll never hurt you the way I did before. I've learned, Clara. I've really learned. For a moment, Clara stood there, looking into his eyes. The emotions swirling inside her were almost too much to bear. But there was something in his gaze, something she hadn't seen before, hope. And maybe, just maybe, that hope was worth taking a chance on. With a sigh, she nodded. Okay, Julian. I'll try. But I can't promise you anything more than that. Julian's face lit up, a smile breaking through the tension that had been building between them. That's all I ask. As they walked into the night, hand in hand, Clara realized that the road ahead was still uncertain. But for the first time in years, she was willing to take the next step. The days that followed their dinner had been a mix of hope and uncertainty. Clara and Julian were treading carefully, still unsure of what the future held but slowly learning how to navigate their renewed connection. For Clara, it was a balancing act, between what she wanted and what she feared. She had already been through so much in her life. She had built a fortress around her heart, a fortress that had once kept her safe from the world. But Julian's reappearance had chipped away at it, little by little, exposing the vulnerability she had hidden for so long. Julian had been patient. Too patient, perhaps. He didn't push her for more than she was willing to give, but Clara could feel the weight of his longing, the hope in his eyes that spoke volumes. And yet, with every passing day, there was still a part of her that hesitated, afraid of getting too close, afraid of losing herself in the same way she had before. It was a Thursday afternoon when Julian showed up at Clara's office unexpectedly. She had been in the middle of a meeting, her mind preoccupied with business decisions and future plans. But when her assistant came in, handing her a small bouquet of lilies with a note attached, everything else faded into the background. She set the flowers aside, opening the note with a mix of curiosity and apprehension. Clara, I know this might be out of the blue, but I wanted to do something that could show you how serious I am about this. About us. Let me know if you're free tonight. I think we need to talk about more than just our past. Julian. Clara stared at the note for a moment. Her heart skipped. 1,000 thoughts rushed through her mind. Was he asking for more? Was this some kind of ultimatum? She had no way of knowing. And yet, part of her wanted to find out what he meant by more than just our past. The evening came quickly, and Clara found herself standing at the entrance of a small art gallery downtown, one of those places that boasted modern installations and avant-garde exhibitions. She had never been one for abstract art, but Julian had insisted it was something she would enjoy. As she stepped inside, the soft lighting and quiet murmurs of conversation greeted her. The space was intimate, filled with both locals and out-of-towners, all wandering through the exhibits. She spotted Julian near a large sculpture, his back to her, absorbed in the piece. Julian, she called softly. He turned, his eyes lighting up when they met hers. Clara, you came. I wasn't sure if I should, she admitted, a hint of vulnerability in her voice. I didn't know what this was. I didn't want to make this into something heavy, Julian said, stepping closer to her. I just wanted to show you something. And maybe give us a chance to talk about everything that's been left unsaid. Clara nodded, uncertain of what exactly he meant, but intrigued enough to follow him. He led her through the gallery, stopping in front of a series of abstract paintings, bold strokes of color and fragmented shapes that seemed to mirror the chaos of her own thoughts. What is it about this art that appeals to you? Clara asked, genuinely curious. Sometimes, Julian began, his voice thoughtful, art doesn't need to make sense. It's not always about understanding every detail. It's about feeling something, about connecting with what's raw and honest beneath the surface. Clara looked at him, her brow furrowed. And that's how you see us? Like a piece of art. He smiled, though it was tinged with sadness. Maybe. I think we've both spent so long running from what's real between us. I know I did. But I'm trying to show you that I'm willing to face what's difficult, even when it's messy. Even when it doesn't make sense. Clara looked at him, searching his face for signs of the man who had once broken her heart. But all she saw now was someone who had been scarred by his own choices, someone who was finally ready to take accountability for the past. They continued walking through the gallery, Julian explaining his thoughts on some of the pieces, his voice steady and calm. Clara listened, but in the back of her mind, she was still processing the emotions that had been stirred up. Finally, they reached a quiet corner of the gallery, where a small bench sat under a single spotlight. Julian motioned for Clara to sit beside him. She hesitated for only a moment before joining him, feeling the space between them shrink with each passing second. I've thought a lot about what happened between us, Julian said, his voice low. And I realize now that I didn't just leave you, Clara. I left myself too. I thought I could just focus on my career and everything would fall into place. But it didn't. The success I chased, it was hollow. And I know it doesn't matter now, but I need you to know that I never meant to hurt you. Clara turned to him, her eyes searching his face. I know you didn't mean to hurt me, Julian. But the truth is, you did. And that's the part one have to come to terms with. She paused, taking a deep breath. I've spent so many years thinking I was fine, thinking that I could forget all of it. But the truth is, I never really forgave you. Not fully. Julian's expression faltered for a moment, but he didn't look away. And I understand that. I'm not asking for your forgiveness right now. What I'm asking for is a chance to show you that I've changed. That I'm not the same man who walked away from you. Clara felt a lump form in her throat. She had always been so focused on her own growth, her own journey, but now she realized how much of her heart she had closed off. She had convinced herself that she was strong enough to never need him again. But sitting here now, facing him, she understood that the past could not be undone, it could only be acknowledged. I'm not sure I can just forget Julian, she said softly. I can't erase everything that happened between us. He nodded, his gaze unwavering. I don't expect you to. But I think we both deserve the chance to heal from it. I think we deserve the chance to rebuild, no matter how long it takes. Clara swallowed, her heart pounding in her chest. She knew what this meant. It meant risking everything, her heart, her trust, her sense of self. But as she looked at him, she realized that she was already halfway there. The walls she had spent so long building were already beginning to crumble, piece by piece. Okay, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I'll try. I can't promise anything more than that. Julian's face broke into a relieved smile, and Clara could see the gratitude in his eyes. He reached for her hand, squeezing it gently. That's all I ask, Clara. That's all I've ever wanted. The days that followed their conversation at the art gallery were a mix of tentative steps forward and moments of reflection. Clara had agreed to try again, but her mind and heart were still wary. The walls she had built up around herself weren't going to crumble easily. Trust, once lost, wasn't easily regained. Yet, despite her hesitation, there was a part of her that felt drawn to Julian. Every time they spoke, every time they shared a laugh or a memory, something inside her stirred, a memory of the love they once had, the joy they had once shared. She had forgotten what it felt like to be truly seen by someone, to have someone understand her in the way Julian had. But she was still scared. Scared of falling too hard. Scared of losing herself again. And more than anything, she was scared of being hurt. It was a quiet Thursday evening when Clara found herself walking toward the small Italian restaurant they had frequented in the early days of their relationship. The place had always been special to them, a corner of their past they had once shared. They had celebrated anniversaries there, shared secrets, and exchanged dreams over glasses of red wine. It seemed fitting that their first official dinner together after reconnecting would take place here. Julian was already waiting for her at the table, his back to the door, eyes scanning the menu as if he hadn't already memorized it. Clara couldn't help but smile as she walked toward him. He had always had a way of making the most mundane moments feel significant, like they were the only two people in the world. Hi, she said softly, her voice carrying an unfamiliar warmth as she took a seat across from him. Hi, Julian replied, his smile lighting up his face. You look beautiful, as always. Clara chuckled nervously, her fingers brushing the edge of her wine glass. You always know how to make a girl feel special. It's not hard when you're sitting across from someone like you. They both fell into an easy conversation, talking about work, family, and life in general. Yet, despite the casual tone, Clara couldn't help but feel the weight of the unspoken tension between them. There was an attraction that simmered beneath the surface, an undeniable chemistry that hadn't gone away after all these years. She could see it in the way Julian looked at her, the way his eyes lingered just a moment too long, the warmth in his voice when he spoke her name. But Clara was still holding back. She was afraid of what would happen if she let herself fall too easily. After all, she had made that mistake once before. As dinner progressed, the conversation shifted to more personal territory. They spoke about their hopes for the future, their dreams, the things they had sacrificed in their careers, and the choices they had made along the way. It was a conversation that felt more like a deep connection than a simple exchange of words. Clara looked at Julian, the man she had once thought she would spend the rest of her life with, and felt the familiar tug of longing. It wasn't just the physical attraction, though she couldn't deny that it was there. It was something deeper, something more fundamental. It was the love they had shared, the love that had once been so strong and undeniable. And yet, she couldn't shake the doubt that lingered in the back of her mind. "Julian," she said quietly, her voice almost a whisper, "I'm still scared. Scared that I'll let myself fall again. Scared that I'll end up hurt the way I was before." Julian's expression softened, and he reached across the table, taking her hand in his. "Clara, I can't promise that it will be easy. I can't promise you that we won't face challenges. But I can promise you that I won't walk away again. I won't leave you." His words struck her like a chord, resonating deep within her. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to trust that he had truly changed, that he was no longer the man who had let her go so easily. But the fear still lingered, clawing at her chest, refusing to be silenced. "I want to believe you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "But every time I start to open up, I remember how it felt when you left. How it felt to be abandoned. And I don't know if I can go through that again." Julian squeezed her hand gently, his thumb brushing the back of her palm. "I understand. And I'm not asking you to forget what happened. I'm asking you to trust that I'm different now. That I'm here because I want to be here with you." There was a moment of silence between them, one that stretched long enough for Clara to feel the weight of her own uncertainty. The truth was, she did want to believe him. She did want to trust him again. But how could she? How could she let go of the past when it still haunted her? "I don't know if I'm ready," Clara admitted, her voice breaking slightly. "I don't know if I can ever truly forget what happened." Julian nodded slowly, his gaze steady. "I'm not asking you to forget. I'm asking you to forgive. Forgive me, not for me but for you, for us." Clara met his gaze, her heart pounding in her chest. There was something in his eyes, something that made her believe he was telling the truth. He wasn't asking for her to erase the past, he was asking for a chance to rebuild, one step at a time. After dinner, Julian walked Clara back to her apartment. The cool night air wrapped around them, the city buzzing softly in the background. They reached her door, and for a moment, neither of them moved. There was an unspoken tension in the air, the kind that only existed between two people who were on the brink of something they both wanted but were too afraid to fully embrace. "Clara," Julian said, his voice low, "I can't promise you that everything will be perfect. But I can promise you that I'll never take you for granted again. I'll never walk away from you again." Clara looked at him, her chest tightening. She had heard those words before years ago, but this time, there was something different. There was no bravado, no excuse, just honesty. "I'm not sure I can let go of my fear just yet," she whispered, "but I want to try. I want to see where this goes." Julian's face softened, his hand reaching up to gently touch her cheek. "That's all I ask, Clara. That's all I need." With a final lingering glance he leaned in, pressing a soft kiss to her forehead, a simple gesture, but one that spoke volumes. Clara closed her eyes, feeling the warmth of his touch, and for the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, they could build something new. Something real. The weeks that followed their dinner at the Italian restaurant were filled with moments of tenderness, laughter, and shared memories. It felt as though Clara and Julian were slowly building something new, brick by brick, with each conversation, each touch, each quiet moment spent together. Their connection was undeniable, but still, Clara couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing, some piece of the puzzle she hadn't yet discovered. She had convinced herself that they were moving forward, that the past was behind them, and that the future could be different. She had allowed herself to open up, to trust him in ways she hadn't thought possible. But deep down there was always the fear that this could all fall apart, that history would repeat itself, that she would end up heartbroken once more. And then, the phone call came. It was a Monday afternoon when Clara's assistant informed her that Julian had been offered an incredible opportunity abroad. He had been headhunted by a major tech company in Europe, one with resources and power that could take his career to unprecedented heights. The offer was prestigious, a dream job for someone like him, someone whose ambition knew no bounds. And yet, as Clara read the email, a cold knot formed in her stomach. She wasn't shocked, not really. Julian's career had always been a driving force in his life. She had known that, understood it, even accepted it. But now the possibility of losing him again, the possibility of him choosing his career over their relationship, felt too real. It was inevitable. She had always known this day would come. The question wasn't if it would happen, but when. That evening, Clara met Julian at a quiet bar downtown, a place they often went to when they wanted to escape the world for a while. The low lighting, the quiet hum of conversation, and the soft jazz music playing in the background created an atmosphere of intimacy, the perfect setting for a conversation that Clara feared would change everything. Julian had already ordered them drinks when Clara arrived, his face serious, the weight of the decision he had to make clearly evident in his eyes. "Clara," he began as she sat down, "I wanted to talk to you about something. I've been offered a position with a company in Europe. It's everything I've worked for, more money, more influence, more opportunity." Clara swallowed hard, her fingers gripping the edge of her glass as she tried to steady her nerves. She had been expecting this moment, but hearing the words made it feel all too real. "Julian, that's incredible. You've worked so hard for something like this." Her voice was steady, but the undercurrent of fear was there, something she couldn't mask, no matter how hard she tried. "I know," he said softly, running a hand through his hair. "But there's a catch. They want me to move quickly. They want me to be there in the next month." Clara's heart dropped. A month. He was already being asked to make a decision, one that didn't give him much time to think it through, much less talk to her about it. She looked at him, trying to gauge the depth of his feelings, trying to figure out where she stood in all of this. "And what does that mean for us?" she asked, her voice betraying the uncertainty she felt. Julian's gaze softened, but the hesitation in his eyes was unmistakable. "Clara, you know I've always had big dreams. I can't turn down an opportunity like this. But I also can't ignore what we've started here. I've been so focused on my career that I've neglected the things that really matter, the things that I didn't even realize were missing until you walked back into my life." Clara felt a lump form in her throat, the words she had been dreading finally being spoken. "So, what are you saying, Julian? That we can't make it work? That your career is more important than what we're trying to build together?" He shook his head, his eyes filled with conflict. "No, Clara. That's not what I'm saying at all. I'm torn. I've spent so much of my life chasing success, chasing opportunities like this. But now, I have to ask myself if that's enough. Can I truly be happy without you in my life? Without this, whatever this is between us?" Clara stared at him, her mind racing. She understood his ambition, understood the lure of success. She had always been a driven person herself, carving out a place for herself in a male-dominated industry. But this was different. This wasn't just about career choices, it was about their future. About their future together. "I'm not asking you to give up everything you've worked for, Julian," Clara said quietly. "I know how important your career is to you. I've always known that. But I need to know if I'm a part of your future. I need to know if I'm enough to make you stay." Julian leaned back in his chair, his hand resting on the table, his fingers absently tapping against the surface. "Clara, you are enough. You always have been. But the truth is, I don't know if I can balance both. I don't know if I can have both, a career like this and a relationship with you. It's not just about choosing between you and my career, but about choosing what kind of life I want to have. And right now, I don't know if I can have both worlds." Clara felt her breath catch in her throat. The fear she had buried deep within her, of losing him, of being left behind again, suddenly felt too real to ignore. She had let herself believe in the possibility of a future with him. But now, that future seemed distant, slipping away with each word he spoke. The silence between them grew heavy, the weight of the decision pressing down on both of them. Clara took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. She had to be honest with him, even if it hurt. "I don't want you to choose me out of guilt, Julian. I want you to choose me because you want to. Because you believe we have something worth fighting for. But if you can't make that decision, if you can't commit to this, to us, I need to know now. I can't keep living in limbo, hoping for a future that might never come." Julian's eyes were full of regret, but his voice was steady as he spoke. "Clara, I don't want to hurt you. But I don't have an answer right now. I need time to think. I need time to figure this out." Clara nodded slowly, her heart heavy. "I understand, Julian. Take all the time you need. But I need you to know something. If you decide to leave, if you choose your career over this, I'll understand. But I won't wait for you. I can't." With those words, she stood up, her heart breaking as she walked away from the man she had once loved, and might still love, knowing that the future they had both dreamed of was now hanging in the balance. The days following their conversation at the bar were marked by a heavy silence. Clara threw herself into her work with an intensity she hadn't felt in weeks. She couldn't afford to dwell on Julian's decision, not when her own professional responsibilities were demanding her full attention. But every time she caught a glimpse of her phone, every time a message from Julian pinged on her screen, her heart would skip a beat. She knew he was still grappling with his decision, trying to figure out where his priorities truly lay. She wanted to believe that he would choose her, that the love they shared, what they had rekindled, was enough to outweigh the ambition that had always driven him. But as the days passed, her doubt grew. She had already lived through one heartbreak. Could she survive another? And was it fair to herself to keep waiting for an answer she wasn't sure would ever come? It was a Friday evening when Clara finally received the message she had been both dreading and hoping for. "Clara, can we talk?" Her pulse quickened. The words were simple, but the weight of them made her hesitate. She had spent so much of her life putting her heart first, but this time, she couldn't ignore the reality that Julian's decision would shape her future, whether she was ready for it or not. The restaurant they had agreed to meet at was quiet, tucked away in a corner of the city, a place where they could talk without the prying eyes of the world. It felt fitting. No pretenses. Just them. When Clara arrived, Julian was already seated, his fingers tracing the rim of a glass of water. He looked tired, his usually bright eyes clouded with indecision. But when he saw her, a soft smile tugged at his lips. "Clara," he said, standing up as she approached. "I'm glad you came." "I didn't have much choice," she replied with a half-smile, but there was an edge to her voice. "You said we needed to talk." Julian nodded, his expression serious. "I've thought about what you said. About what I need. And I've come to a decision." Clara took a seat across from him, her heart beating in her chest. "And?" For a moment, Julian seemed to hesitate, as if weighing his next words. "I've been offered the job in Europe. It's everything I've worked for, Clara. It's a dream. But it's not the only dream I have anymore." Clara's heart skipped. Was this it? Was he finally going to choose her? Or was he going to walk away, like he had all those years ago? "I've spent so much of my life chasing success, thinking that it would be enough," he continued, his voice filled with emotion. "But the truth is, success doesn't mean anything if you don't have someone to share it with. I realized that over the past few weeks, especially after everything we've been through together, I've been so focused on my career that I forgot what really mattered." "What you matter?" Clara held her breath, trying to keep her emotions in check. She had to hear this, had to let him speak the truth before she could let herself believe it. "I've made my decision," Julian said, his gaze never leaving hers. "I'm turning down the offer. I can't take that job. Not when I found someone, who's worth more than any success I could achieve alone. Clara, I choose you. I choose us." Her breath caught in her throat as his words settled in. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to feel the weight of his commitment, the depth of his love. But the fear still lingered. Could she trust him this time? Could she really let herself believe that they could build something lasting, something real? They sat there for a long moment, the world outside the restaurant fading into the background. Clara searched his face for signs of doubt, signs of hesitation. But all she saw was sincerity, a raw honesty that took her breath away. "What about your career?" she asked softly, her voice barely a whisper. "What about your dreams?" Julian reached across the table, taking her hand in his. "I don't have to give up my dreams, Clara. But I'm no longer willing to sacrifice everything else for them. I've learned that success without love, without connection, is hollow. You've shown me that." Clara felt the walls she had spent years building begin to crumble, piece by piece. She had been so afraid of letting him in again, so afraid of losing herself in the process. But now, as she looked at him, she saw the man he had become, the man who was willing to take a step back, to choose love over ambition, to choose her over everything else. "I'm scared, Julian," she admitted, her voice trembling. "I'm scared that I'll let myself believe this. That I'll fall for you again and get hurt. I don't know if I can go through that." He squeezed her hand gently, his gaze steady. "I know you're scared. And I know I can't erase the past. But I can promise you that I'll spend every day showing you that I'm worth the risk. That we're worth the risk." Clara's heart swelled with a mixture of relief and hope. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to imagine a future with him, a future where their dreams, both individual and shared, could coexist. They had both learned the hard way that love was not something to be taken for granted, but something to be nurtured, protected, and fought for. With a deep breath, Clara finally allowed herself to believe in the possibility of a second chance. "Okay," she said softly, her voice filled with a mixture of vulnerability and conviction. "I'll try, Julian. I'll try to trust you. To trust us." A smile broke across his face, and in that moment, Clara knew that everything had changed. The road ahead would still be uncertain, filled with challenges and moments of doubt. But they were no longer bound by the past. They were free to build something new, something stronger. And for the first time in a long time, Clara felt the weight of her fears lift, replaced by the lightness of possibility. The days and weeks that followed were filled with new beginnings. Clara and Julian spent more time together, rediscovering the joy of companionship and the thrill of starting anew. Julian's decision to turn down the job offer was just the first step in a journey that neither of them could predict, but they were ready to face it together. As the seasons changed, so did their relationship. It was no longer about the past or the mistakes they had made, it was about the present, about building something that was uniquely theirs. The whispers of doubt that had once plagued Clara's heart began to fade, replaced by the steady rhythm of trust and commitment. In the end, it wasn't the grand gestures or the promises of forever that defined their love, it was the quiet moments, the shared glances, the small decisions that led them back to each other. And for Clara, that was enough.